And I say to colleagues in this House, have a care with what we are doing. We are an unelected House. We are an unelected House, and this amendment and the other amendments are part of a campaign which is putting peers against the people. The people, yes it is. Yes it is. The people set out very clearly that they wish to leave the European Union, which meant leaving the customs union as well. As my noble friend Lord Lawson has pointed out, it was central to the whole campaign. So what is going on here is an exercise by Remainers in this House, who are the majority, who refuse to accept the verdict of the British people, and I believe they are playing with fire. And I hope that this, on reflection, that this amendment will not be carried.
The common external tariff is protectionist, and as such it's bad for the efficiency and the productivity of our industries. It puts up the prices of goods imported from outside the European Union into the United Kingdom to the disadvantage of our consumers and our producers. 21% of household incomes in this country are on average spent on food, clothing and footwear, and indeed a higher percentage by less well-off households. The existing customs union puts high tariffs on these essentials, 26% on food, 11.8% on clothing, 11.4% on footwear on average. Also objectionable in the common external tariff is that as a barrier to imports from developing countries, it impairs their economic development. The European Union's average external tariff is 5.1%, and that is high by comparison to the external tariff of the USA at 3.5%.
What is being proposed is that we should not be in the European Union, but we within the customs union. In other words, we should be in a quasi-colonial status. That is not something which I think the British people as a whole will give house room to. But what is even more nonsensical is the idea that you cannot trade without a trade agreement. I hope we can conclude trade agreements, but you can trade without. The rest of the world, most of the world is not in the European Union. Most of the world does an enormous amount of trade with the European Union. Most of the world is growing a great deal faster, which is rather more important than the European Union is. And if the customs union was so wonderful and the single market, then the European Union would be the most dynamic part of the world economy, which it certainly isn't.
Many of the arguments that we've heard for these amendments almost boil down to saying that nothing can ever be changed for the better. Yep. This is indeed a peculiar psychological quirk of human beings, but it's not borne out by history. And as my noble friend Lord Lamont said, if this amendment is passed and we are in a customs union but not in the European Union, then the UK would be obliged to operate a system of external tariffs with no say in setting them. The UK would not be able to enter into new trade agreements with other countries around the world. The UK would be bound by the European Court of Justice in terms of rules, standards, and that would apply even in the domestic economy. The UK would be significantly worse off than it is today. My Lords, a customs union is by definition a form of discrimination. Ricardo, Cobden, Gladstone, those great liberals would be spinning in their grave at the thought that their descendant party today is in favour of this form of trade discrimination. The answer to growing protectionism in the world, my Lords, is not to retreat inside a protectionist bloc of slow-growing countries that constitute just 10% of the world's future economic growth, but to seek free trade opportunities wherever we can find them. The answer is not to discriminate against African and Asian economies.
Now, the important point is that I would say there is only one country that is in the position that is being advocated by Lord Kerr, and that is Turkey, which is a member of the customs union outside the EU. Turkey is required to align itself fully under Article 56(1) of the agreement between Turkey and the EU, where it says this: Where it adopts legislation in an area of direct relevance to the functioning of the customs union, the community shall immediately inform Turkey thereof within the customs union joint committee to allow Turkey to adopt corresponding legislation which will ensure the proper functioning of the customs union. So Turkey has absolutely no say on tariffs or on the definition of products, the internal rules that apply on the internal market. As regards trade with non-members, Turkey is obliged to harmonise its commercial policy with that of the EU. It's obliged to grant tariff-free access to goods from any country with which the EU has negotiated a free trade agreement without having any say or any representation in the negotiations. And nor does that mean that Turkey gets free tariff access into the result of the negotiations with the new agreements that the EU signs up. That does not follow either. So I don't think that the model that the noble Lord Kerr is putting forward, given for where we are, is at all satisfactory. And I don't think the Turks regard it as very satisfactory. It has, I understand, the agreement that Turkey has with the EU has been compared by Turks to what is called the capitulation of the Ottoman Empire, which was the provisions under which Western traders entering Turkey were given exemption from prosecution, exemption from taxation, exemption from conscription, or the searching of their homes. They don't regard it as an entirely satisfactory arrangement, and nor should we. It's not right for us either.
My Lord, the nub of the issue is this. For the UK to remain in the customs union and bound by the EU's common external tariff, it would mean providing preferential access to the UK market for countries that the EU agrees trade deals with, without necessarily gaining preferential access for UK exports to such countries. Alternatively, we would need the EU to negotiate with third countries on the UK's behalf. This would leave us with less influence over our international trade policy than we do now, and would not, my lords, in our humble assertion, be in the best interests of UK businesses. By leaving the customs union, by establishing a new and ambitious customs arrangement with the EU, we will be able to forge new trade relationships with our partners around the world and maintain as frictionless trade as possible in goods between the UK and the EU, providing a powerful and positive voice for free trade across the globe. There are real opportunities for the UK from increasing our trade with fast-growing economies around the world. The EU itself predicts that 90% of future world GDP growth is expected to be generated outside of Europe, a trend that is expected to continue over the next 5 to 10 years. In assessing the options for the UK's future customs relationship with the EU, the Government will be guided by what delivers the greatest economic advantage to the UK and by 3 key strategic objectives. Firstly, ensuring that UK-EU trade is as frictionless as possible. Secondly, by avoiding a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, a commitment that was solidified by December's joint report. And thirdly, by establishing an independent international trade policy.